I want to talk about what's on this first screen right here. These four pictures across the top. Beer can have many, many different ingredients included in it, but it's always going to have these four sort of building block ingredients. The first one here is water, and we're not going to spend a lot of time talking about that. It seems silly to think about water as an ingredient, but beer is a beverage. It's mostly water, and I mention it because there's no magic that happens in the process of making beer that's going to take water that in any way smells or tastes a little bit funny or off and magically convert it into wonderful beer. That's not going to happen. So you have to use really good water to make really good beer. The next picture up here is grain. More specific than that, it's malted grain, and more specific than that, it's more than likely going to be malted barley that you deal with in making beer. There's a lot of different grains that can find their way into beer. Some people might say, oh, I like wheat beer. I like wheat beers too. For the most part, the wheatiest, if that's a word, the wheatiest of wheat beers is going to be maybe 50% wheat, 50% barley, and that's kind of rare. Most wheat beers we come across here in America are maybe 10 or as low as 5% wheat, and the rest is barley. So barley really is the bread and butter. Barley is going to provide lots of flavor. Any of the grains are going to provide lots of flavor, but they're also going to provide the natural sugars, which will eventually ferment into alcohol. And let's face it, that's why we're doing this, right? So that's the second ingredient. Third ingredient here are hops. These are a very misunderstood ingredient in beer. A lot of people don't know what hops are or what they do. The hop plant is a vine-like plant that grows vertically, and in the late summer, early fall, the flowers that this plant produces are these little hop cones right here. They look like little tiny soft green pine cones. They're about this big. The hops provide sort of a spiciness and a natural bitterness that counteracts the sweetness of the sugars that come out of the grains. And they have some preservative qualities that we'll talk about later. And then the fourth ingredient here, easily my favorite part of this whole process, is the yeast. Yeast are single-celled microorganisms, and they only do about three things in their whole little lives. In the presence of food, when they sense that there's, and to them food is naturally occurring sugars, when they sense those sugars around them, they reproduce. And how do yeast reproduce? Well, a single cell in the presence of food slowly grows almost like an arm off of it, and then that slowly just pops off and breaks off, and that cell divides into two cells. And then those two will divide into four cells, and so forth and so forth. So when food is around them, they reproduce and they eat. They eat the sugars, they eat the solid sugars around them, and then they in turn excrete alcohol and CO2 bubbles. And that's pretty much all they do in their lives. Eventually they die. But that's all that they do. But the old brewer's saying is that brewers don't make beer. Brewers assemble the ingredients and the yeast make the beer, because without them, all we would have is a crazy, sweet, sugary drink.